All right, inshallah ta'ala. Excuse me. Okay, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So the question, I believe, was in regards to mortgages. Is that correct?
Yes, brother. Mortgage,
Okay.
financing, yeah.
All right. So in reality, I had already assumed that the question was answered from whatever we discussed in our last session, but then I came across some more information, and it would appear that it's not quite answered with the things that we went over last time. And so what I wanted to do is kind of go over, if you will, be patient with me, some of the things we discussed earlier, maybe a little bit more in-depth detail of it. And a matter of fact, at this point, just actually dive right into the actual subject matter of riba, and in according to the Sharia, what exactly it is, and then talk about the issue of a mortgage. And inshallah ta'ala, we can get some answers out of it. However, I will say that also it also has sparked up questions of my own from a more scholarly point of view, about the basic two answers that we have in regards to mortgages. I think probably we already know about that because it's pretty prevalent in, for instance, online. You can get a lot of fatwa and a lot of responses by different scholars about this issue. There's really only two answers. Either a person will say that the mortgage that you take, or that you pay rather, and the financial assistance that you may take from the bank, is in fact a type of riba, and it remains haram no matter where you are. There's no distinction whether you're in the Muslim world or whether you're in a non-Muslim country. And the other opinion, of course, is that there is a difference, and that when you're in a non-Muslim country, you're allowed to use it. Now that's the basic, right? We'll try and get into why, a little bit, inshallah, of why both sides say what they say. But inshallah, before we do that, it's good to go over some things and maybe add to it. So I don't want to be redundant, but we have to go over it simply because, obviously there are certain things that we must know ourselves and we must understand ourselves, so that given the scenario, whenever we're confronted with certain issues, we can to a certain extent answer the question ourselves. That doesn't mean that you're given a license to be a scholar per se, or a mufti and give fatwa, but it does mean that life is like that we will often find that we are put in situations. We're not always going to find an answer online. We're not always going to find a scholar readily available to give us a satisfactory answer. Sometimes we need to answer the question ourselves. And this is why the scholars wrote their books anyhow. This information was actually supposed to be for the general public, so that they could be conversant enough with the Sharia to answer their own problems. Scholars were left to kind of delve into the intricacies of those problems so that they can come up with answers. But even in their answers, sometimes they are giving people a pretty much so like a general view, all right, so that they can navigate their way around certain issues. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that not every single question is answered all the time. But yet, if you study their books deeply, you will find that they are trying to give you certain guidelines and certain answers that will later on provide you with the necessary tools to answer questions on your own, if you are in certain situations where you don't always have someone there to tell you do this or don't do that. And also the Prophet ﷺ gave us that instruction too, that in many different ways, there's so many hadith that we probably have heard before, where the Prophet also gave us the same kind of guidelines. In other words, trained even the common Muslim, the everyday Muslim, to be at a certain level where they can, at certain times, be conscious of and aware of the situation that they're in and be able to answer the question for themselves, even if it's just leaving something because of the doubt that they have. As the famous hadith says, al-halalu bayyin, that the halal is very clear, wal haramu bayyin, as well as the haram is also very clear. Wa baynahuma shubahat, right? But there are in between the halal and haram sometimes doubtful matters. And what did he instruct us to do about it? Well, if you're not aware, if you don't know the answer to something, because this is what shubahat means in this case, that it is not clear to you whether something is halal and haram, then the best thing to do is to leave it. Right? So even in that, the Prophet gave us very simple instructions. In other hadith, the Prophet ﷺ was asked once, what is sin? And the Prophet ﷺ responded by saying, al-ithmu ma haka fi sadrik wa karihtu an yantali alayhi an-nas. The definition he gave of sin here was profound, because he said a sin in essence is something which does not settle in your heart. That haka fi sadrik literally means that it literally roams around your heart, meaning that it won't settle, and it's unsettling, if you will. If you were to give it if you were going to give it some type of description, you would say it's something that is unsettling. You don't feel right about it, right? People say they lose sleep over certain things, right? Something like that, of that nature. It's unsettling. It just doesn't feel right with you. And also, in addition to that, that's the first qualification. That, in other words, again, think about this, is what the Prophet's giving us guidance about things that may not be clear all the time. If it's doubtful, leave it. It's because halal and haram should be very clear. That's the first thing to understand about fiqh. That in matters of halal and haram, it should be very clear. Anything that is doubtful or causes doubt or makes you think twice and you're not sure of, this is the shubahat, leave it alone. That's the first. The second thing is that if something is sinful in nature, the Prophet gave it two qualifications. Number one, it causes you to feel uncomfortable. It's unsettling. And the second qualification he gave, something that you would feel very, very uncomfortable, or you would hate that other people would come to know that you are doing such a thing. So something that you would be embarrassed if other people found out that you were doing it, that it wouldn't be an embarrassment to you, then that also is termed to be a sin. Now again, these are things in matters of which you're not sure of. The second hadith also applies to it, because the same question was being given, to how do I know something is sinful in nature? So again, you have to, sorry, forgive me for repeating the word again, trying to watch that, no repetitions, inshallah. You see that the second hadith also is in the same light, that there are issues that we're not always aware of, and we may feel that we don't know whether it's sinful in nature or not. How do I determine whether it is sinful in nature? Because that's what the questioner wanted from the Prophet ﷺ. How do I determine if something that I'm unsure of is sinful in nature? And the Prophet ﷺ responded by saying that the sin has these two qualifications. It is something that is unsettling, you don't feel comfortable with. And number two, it's something that if other people saw you doing it also, you would be very unhappy. You wouldn't be happy that other people caught you in the act, so to speak. It's something that you'd be embarrassed if other people knew about what you were doing. Again, no. How can I not say again? That is in relation to things that we are not sure of, their permissibility, or if they are sinful in nature. Other than that, if there is clear evidences, or we are also very sure about something's permissibility or its impermissibility, it's hurma, the opposite of permissibility. And also, if we are very clear and sure about the sinful nature of something, then these two hadiths don't apply. These are the things that we already know. So, having said that, we go to riba. As I had discussed briefly last time, the first thing to understand about the word itself, because that's very important. Again, if we are told something is halal or something is haram, when you use the word even something, right, that's not too clear, right? It's very ambiguous, or it is something that can be further defined. And this is very important, because the idea of riba being mentioned specifically as a word in the Quran However, what exactly it's referring to was not that specific. It's what we call mujmal. Maybe you've heard that word before. Mujmal comes from ijmal in Arabiya. Ijmal means something that is concise. It's the opposite of tafsil. Tafsil means to elucidate and explain something very clearly, right? And so it's when you do tafsil, when something is mufassal, it means that you have clearly explained every facet of whatever it is that you had to explain. Now, I know, again, that's very general, but it doesn't matter what you're talking about. As an example, if I say, take a group of people with you on your trip. So a group of people is what we call ijmalan. You know, you have to take a group of people, but you weren't told who, right? It wasn't specific. It was very general. Just take a group of people. Now, if someone were to ask the question, well, whom should I take? This is tafsil. So if I say, whom shall I take? Then that is the explanation. Now, that is the very, if you would, detailed explanation of what I meant by saying a group of people. Stay with me. That's all related. So the word riba in the Quran itself is mujmal. Okay, so the Sharia has made it mujmal. In other words, it wasn't really clearly defined of exactly what is riba. Okay, it is just said simply put that riba is haram. Now, what exactly is riba? Okay, we don't have a detailed explanation except for certain hadith that are what they call mustafida. That means, or you know, it is or mustafida. I'm so sorry. Mustafida is akin somewhat. It's similar to mutawatir. It's a very technical term used by scholars that basically means if something is so well known that it may not necessarily reach the level of mutawatir, but it is mustafida. So it gives us a certain amount of, it gives us, let's put it this way, it gives us an amount of certainty that the Prophet ﷺ had said such a thing. And in that case, what did he say? Basically, there's 6 things that the Prophet ﷺ explained further. But even in this hadith, he didn't really explain exactly what riba is. He said gold, silver, wheat, or barley and wheat, salt and dates. Those 6 things. This is what he said, that there should be no tafadul. Tafadul means that if you exchange these items, right, that you are taking, let's say, advantage of the situation, and you actually have the better of the deal. You have ziyada, meaning you've gotten the better, if you will, product by exchanging it for a lesser product. That's really what tafadul means, okay? So again, you see that the nature of this hadith is still not clear enough to explain every transaction that we do. And even some scholars have differed about what exactly can we not have tafadul, or this difference of, if you will, the value of that item. Is it based on its actual value according to, let's say, like dry dates and wet dates, or is it the volume of it, right? So all that had to be elucidated even further. You get my point? So then we have other hadith, like for instance, I mentioned this hadith too, that what is called nasi'a, which is interest-based loans. Let's just put it that way for now. That was clearly mentioned. Okay, and so that was included in an explanation. So relating that all to what I said earlier, in other words, if I tell you, take a group with you, and then you ask the question, well, who should I take? And I start explaining, well, you can take this type of people, or this person, or maybe I give exact names. You can take fulan and fulan. Those explanations is the tafsir. The point being is that the original word in the Quran was not explained in detail. The hadith explains some of it, but even in this hadith, we find that not every transaction is mentioned. Obviously, there are many other things that human beings do in the field of business and monetary transactions that were not mentioned clearly by the Prophet ﷺ. So therefore, we get to the issue of what? How do the scholars explain these hadith, okay, and understand them? Meaning by that, what is the illah? The illah means this would be the reasoning behind which something may be halal or haram. If you can figure that out, then you can make analogy, and you can use qiyas. You can use deductive an analogy to find out whether other things can be halal and haram based on the fact that they had the same reasoning or cause behind it being halal and haram. Does that make sense? I mean, you can. I think we can make this interactive, inshallah, just as long as people don't talk over each other. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Right? So if you find the cause of something being haram, if it's clearly mentioned, or if you figured it out, and when we mean clearly mentioned, we mean that the Quran and the Sunnah explains itself by saying that the reason that this is haram is this or the other thing. Okay, so now let's go to that part. Something to be something that you can use as an analogy that this thing is haram for this. You have to know first what is the reasoning behind its being haram. So having said that, it is said that there are three things that are necessary in any particular transaction of regarding business or monetary. There's three things that from the hadith we have derived as being the cause of something being riba and therefore haram. That is that if the items are items that are their value is determined by either weight or volume. I think we already said that before, right? But just go over this in your head. So in other words, the values that the items that you're exchanging, their value, their qadr is determined by weight, kale, or wazn, okay, or your volume or weight, okay, or weight and volume if you want to put it in that order. The other is that they are of the same jins. They are of the same kind. That is that they are the same type of item. And you determine that by different ways as well. For instance, if things have the same origin, right? Or if they have the same name, they're the same product by name, that would be considered the same type of jins. Okay? Now, the other thing is, of course, what we're talking about falls under the category of nasi'ah, that is a loan that is based on interest, simply put, right? When we're talking about mortgages and everything else, we're not talking about those former things, okay? Even if you might want to delve deeply into, like, the market value of homes, how are they determined? For instance, are they determined solely on, for instance, its volume? I don't really think so. I mean, yes, that's taken into consideration how large the land is, how large the house is, right? But not really, because volume also, by the way, is not necessarily like height and width and things like that. Volume is how much you have inside of, for instance, a can, right? It has 32 ounces of whatever. Okay, so that too. How do we do that? So, but the point is here, I think the main issue of a mortgage is not any of that. It is the fact that it is nasi'ah. It is an interest-bearing loan. And the fact that really when you pay off a mortgage, the initial payments are primarily, the majority of it is going to repay that loan to the bank, which they are putting interest in it. Okay, I think we all understand that. So then what did I say last time? This is the third part of the issue. That I said that basically the only school of thought that would allow such a transaction, frankly speaking, is the Hanafi madhab, and that is based on the original fatwa of Imam Abu Hanifa and his student Imam Muhammad. It's interesting to note that Imam Abu Yusuf, rahimahullah ta'ala, his other star student, and the reason why I'm saying this is the madhab itself has certain structure, all right? That's why it's a school of thought. And the primary students whose opinions were very well regarded in the madhab are Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad, rahimahullah ta'ala. So in this case, Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Muhammad, rahimahullah ta'ala, on one side, which they say that in a non-Muslim country, what is termed as Darul Harb, right? Then it is permissible, there is no riba, there is no such thing as riba between a Muslim and a non-Muslim, or even a Muslim who lives in that land. Okay, that's their opinion. Now here, what you see is Imam Abu Yusuf has a different opinion. He agrees with the rest of the majority, which say that it doesn't matter where you are, Muslim or non-Muslim land, riba remains haram. Therefore, they say that this is an interest-bearing transaction. You can't do it. Okay, now based on the opinion of Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Muhammad, and the important thing why I'm saying is Imam Abu Yusuf differed with them is because it's still doesn't change the fact that the books that are considered by academians and scholars as the reliable books of fatwa of the Hanafi madhab still state this fatwa of Imam Abu Hanifa, meaning this is considered the sound opinion of the Hanafi madhab. That's a whole nother issue. That's an academic issue. So basically that too, though, has certain issues, because even in that fatwa, there's an illah, meaning there's a reason behind that fatwa. The reason being that the wealth of people living in that land is aslan in its original state for the Muslim is that it is permissible. Meaning by that if there was a case where there was war between those two countries, their wealth would actually become ghanima, meaning it's the spoils of war. Their wealth does not have the same hurma, or it doesn't have the same sanctity as the wealth of other Muslims and non-Muslims as well, living in a Muslim land, okay? So based on that, there's a reason. Why is that important? Because even there, in that fatwa, there's a reason behind it. And that's why some scholars like Ibn Abidin, rahimahullah ta'ala, if you read his works, it kind of implies that that would mean that it's all implicated that you can take riba but not give it. Okay? You can take riba and not give it. So then that goes back to the same issue of a mortgage, because in this case, you're not taking it, you're giving it, right? So then there, other scholars still boil it down to another issue, which is a maxim in it is a type of golden rule, if you will, in fiqh, which is that ad-dururiyat tabihu mahdhurat, that necessities will at times permit what is normally impermissible. So necessities at times can permit what is unpermissible or impermissible. So based on that, they will say that a maskan, yani a home, for instance. All right, these are one of the things that are mentioned to be amongst your necessities of life. A vehicle or a mode of transportation is a necessity of life. So based on that too, some will say that because there's some differences of opinion here, and that there is the necessity, all right, to have these things, then it would be permissible to use a mortgage, okay, to purchase or to buy those things. Now, the only thing that I just kind of like discovered, so to speak, in all of this is that basically the last part, that yes, there is some indication, according to some scholars, that that permissibility is based on a reason, again, an illah. So in order for something to be analogous to that which is permissible, there has to be a common thread between them. In other words, that the reasoning for it was that being in a non-Muslim country and being able to take riba from them is that their wealth does not have the same sanctity. So the point of that being is that it's kind of implicated, even if it's not said, that a Muslim should not give it. And Allah knows best. So that I'm still going to go deeper into to find out exactly how that is answered by some scholars. So far, it seems like that is the implication. And then also, the fact is that the reason why I'm saying that is that we still have this narration that is attributed to the great Tabi'i Maqbul, rahimahullah ta'ala, who basically attributed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that la riba fi dar al-hab, that if you take that as a hadith and you take that as some type of proof, you know, and again, that's another scholarly discussion whether you would actually accept that as being admissible as evidence. But if you do, there's another issue here, is that the hadith is very clear that la riba would say, which seems to negate that there's even such thing as riba at all while you're living in non-Muslim lands. You see, it's not just stipulated that under certain conditions or there's a certain reason behind it. It's just said, simply put, that there's no such thing. All right. Obviously, Imam Abu Hanifa might not have understood the hadith, even if he used it as dalil in that way, because he did kind of say there, he gave his own reasoning behind it, that their wealth has no sanctity, as I mentioned before. But yet that still causes, you know, again, some type of reason to investigate further. So that's really the talkhis and the synopsis of it all. At the end of the day, those are really the only two opinions that are there. What I didn't understand is that I was told, and again, this is why I want to make it interactive, that some scholars have claimed that that mortgages are not the same type of interactions that are mentioned in the hadith. So I need to know exactly who's, you don't have to tell me who said that, but what exactly is meant by that, because even if it's not the type of transactions that are mentioned in those 6 things, you know, gold and silver, barley, wheat, dates, you know, it doesn't really matter because it's still considered an interest-bearing loan. So what would be the argument there? I want to hear that, actually, if you don't mind.
I can speak on that. So
Okay, brother.
what I heard
Yeah.
what I heard is like they differentiate between a perishable and non-perishable commodities. So they say gold and all this grain and everything you borrow, you will spend it somewhere, right? And but house or a car is what you will use. So you're getting some advantage or some benefit out of it. So that's why they differentiate between the rules.
Okay, understood.
Yeah,
Now that's
yeah,
a much
I'll add little bit to it. You know, they say because you are using, you know, the house and the car, so it's a kind of, you know, rent you are paying on using those commodities as Adil mentioned.
okay. The
And
second point.
they say like
Go
they
ahead.
say like sorry, actually I'm driving right now, and you know, maybe, you know, my internet is also not very good right now. So they also
No
say
problem.
like they also say like, you know, that the currency, the interest or riba on currency, because currency, once you get it, you're gonna consume it and it's gone and you have to reproduce it. So that's gonna be like difficult for a person who took the loan, right? But in the case of house or a car, you are using it, so that's a rent. Plus, you know, you have the actual commodity. So it's different than, you know, what was not permissible. Make sense?
Okay. Yes. Now, I would say the first point, if I understood it correctly, is that what's called basically amwal ribawi, the difference between perishable and non-perishable goods, right? So basically, a house and a car obviously are what we would call non-perishable, you know, and then they are also saying that the second point being that you are getting some benefit from those items. That is, if I've understood it correctly. Is that right?
Yes.
Right. So that's a different point.
On I-70.
So that's a different point. So if you say that, for instance, on an interest-bearing loan, where really the other person is just making, you know, charging you interest so that you can pay back that loan, is a little bit different here in this case, because you're actually getting something out of it. So it wouldn't be the same as, let's say, even if you took the fatwa that in Darul Harb in a non-Muslim land, you can take riba, right, implicating that you shouldn't give it. But that's because if you give it, you're not getting anything in return. Here, there's actually some benefit. Is that correct? If I understood that point correctly?
Yeah, that is correct.
Okay, you're getting some benefit, in other words. So, okay, khair. See, so far I've been reading on this, right? And I've been also asking other scholars who are kind of like, you know, in that field, that I have to wait for their response about that particular issue, okay? Because if that issue is brought up, it puts a different light on it. So you have to investigate things a little bit further. So what that means is, of course, like, again, is this under the hukam, the ruling of something being riba, because it's not necessarily, from certain viewpoint, it's not necessarily just an interest-bearing transaction. There are other things to consider. Okay, so what are those two things to consider? I would like to wrap that up with what I've just heard. One of them is that, of course, these are non-perishable goods, if you will, not what is called al-amwalu ribawi. Okay, and then also the other issue was, of course, that you are getting some benefit. If I understood all of this, you're getting some benefit from what you're using.
Yeah, that is correct, Imam.
Okay, All right. That was what the question was about, basically. So, yeah, because the other issue I said about having a necessity of using these things would not even be in question here. The question is it even considered completely from the Sharia vantage point, what's called nasi'ah, which I've been translating roughly as an interest-bearing loan. From the Sharia point of view, that's the question, correctly? Correct or not?
Yes, sorry, I didn't get the point. I'm sorry, I'm actually driving
The
also.
point is that we know that interest-bearing loans would generally be considered riba, either way, right? But I think the question here also is, would a mortgage, strictly speaking from a Sharia point of view, be considered an interest-bearing loan because of these
Yes.
factors?
So according to those scholars, they even don't, put that under the riba. They say like it's not a riba-based loan at all. It's like a hire purchase agreement or something like that. It's not,
Okay,
yeah. They even don't put this under that the same kind of riba issues.
right.
But
Okay, I
but
got you.
but we take loan from bank and we return them extra money. So where the house come in this transaction? This is between us and bank, isn't it?
No, bank
So
is
Yes,
so
giving you
so
loan
bank,
for the
yeah,
house.
bank put the lien on the house, right? So bank,
That is a
it's not
guarantee for
like
bank. That is
so
guarantee for bank that they will recover
so
the
that
whole amount.
yeah. So that's
right,
what it, yeah. So that's what it is,
Doesn't mean
right?
that they are.
Even if you're gonna get the house, right? You are using the house, so you can think. See, it's America. It's not a Muslim country.
right,
They're not gonna
right,
follow the Sharia terms and say that it's not an interest, it's a rent, right? So
right.
the terminology they use, they always gonna be different terminologies. But
Of
those
course.
scholars who I'm talking about, they say they can call whatever they want, but because we are using the car, we are using the house, so
Right.
it's not that kind of riba that was actually
Right.
uh,
That's what I've understood from what you said. So if that point, it seems like it has some validity. You understand? Because it doesn't matter what term you use. Let me just maybe go to a different issue to kind of explain that. Sometimes we get caught up in the words without understanding really what the Sharia is saying. So, like, use the
very
word alcohol.
absolutely.
You understand? So use the word alcohol. Okay. Now, of course, every Muslim, when they hear that word, specifically that word, they're going to be a little bit, taken aback. Alcohol, right? But if you just know the word in English and its usage is alcohol, it's just referring to any chemical substance that goes through a type of, what you call it? Sorry, I'm
Fermentation.
thinking. Right, like no, sorry, but sometimes my brain freezes up like this. So the computer is getting old, So uh, it goes from fermentation, exactly. Like any chemical that has to get to that stage through a fermenting process, that's called alcohol. You see what I'm saying? Now the question is in Sharia, is every chemical that goes through fermentation, is it haram? And the answer by Sharia is no. Okay, if it's not intoxicating and if it was not made for that purpose, like beer and vodka and all these other type of alcohols, then the answer would be that yes, it is permissible. So if a Muslim only understood that alcohol equals haram and they don't really know what the word means, right? Then you might as well give up your hand sanitizers and your perfumes and, like, rubbing alcohol and all that. Right? You understand? Because then it's all just haram. But that's not the case, because the Sharia does not say that alcohol is haram. The Sharia says that wine, khamr, is haram, and that something that is muskir, that is intoxicating, is haram. Is that understood?
Yeah, I mean anything that causes khamr is haram, right? I mean when you are using any kind of like nail polish or something else or a perfume, that's you are not taking and it's not gonna cause you khamr, right?
Right. And it's not, again, it's the word. Alcohol in English is just any chemical substance that has been fermented. So you understand? So not every chemical substance that goes to fermentation, that process, is an intoxicant. You understand? It's not something you drink to. So it's very right. So that's what, if you take that idea and you place it in this case as well, this is why we have, like, again, it needs tafsil. You have to have a further elucidation and explanation of it. So, okay, is this riba or not? It has to be explained. And how do we explain it? That's why I mentioned there's certain reasons behind. For instance, there's certain things that are mentioned in the hadith that are haram based on certain reasons, okay? And those reasons are later on further explained. So there's tafadul, there is like basically exchanging goods of the same value, but you're getting more out of it, okay? There is nasi'a, which means specifically a loan, a monetary loan given to someone, and then you expect it back with interest, okay? Now, interest in this, like you said, is a word that we're looking at here when we say that these mortgages are interest-based loans, but then we're not looking at the total picture of what they mean by that. If you're saying, like, if you just change the word and said rent based on a higher, right, let's say a higher price, right? Is that necessary? If you said it that way, would we say it's haram? Now, I understand that point. Now I get what was asked. Unfortunately, because I didn't quite get the point, I wasn't able to go further with that question. I just kind of like went back to some of the books and went over the issue of primarily taking interest in a non-Muslim land, which again, according to the Hanafi madhab, is permissible, okay? That's what I kind of focused on. And then, you know, I didn't really realize that that was like the crux of the question. So when you put it that way, then yeah, it does kind of put a different spin on it. I thought about that for a second, but I wasn't sure if that was being asked. So if that's the case, then you have other arguments to consider, as you had said, that it's not a perishable good. It's not really something of the same jins. It's not the same exact thing that you're, for instance, not like a regular exchange of two items of the same type. It's not something that even from the value, the market value of a home, how is it determined? And then on top of that, also, when in the mortgage, it's not just the fact that you're paying that loan back through the bank, but you're also using something, an item in this house, you're actually using. It's a home or a car. So it's not like this is a one-sided, if you will, exchange. So, okay, now that makes sense to me. Unfortunately, I would like to concentrate on that last part of it more. So basically what I would like to do is, before I go further with that, if you can send me exactly, if you have an article or if you have something online, a fatwa online, where the scholar that you keep on mentioning, because we haven't had names yet, right? But those scholars, I want to see exactly what they wrote about it or said about it, if you don't mind.
Brother Dickinson?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question. So when you're paying mortgage and for the house, you own the property eventually, you own it. So,
right.
And I know you're talking about paying it like a rent, but how is that different from just renting a house, which you don't own it? So how do you differentiate between the two? That's what I struggle with, because yeah, you're paying a little more for that house, but at the end of that 30-year, 15 years, you end up paying more than what was the market value of the house. So somebody's taking advantage of that situation by giving you the loan and making extra money on top of the fair market value of the house. So
right.
how is that can that be called rent when you rent a property? You don't own that property.
Right. They're still getting their profit. But here, the question is also that in both cases, you're also benefiting as well. Even if the people who are renting or selling it to you are getting a profit, but you're still benefiting.
Yeah, and see, at the end of the day, it's a business for the bank and the mortgage company. You know, they're gonna get the profit anyway, right? So
right.
the thing is, their profit is kind of over rent, because we are using the commodity, like in house or in the case of car, right? So
right.
they are doing business, so they're gonna get the money, right? And I mean, most of the time, it's a win-win situation for both, you know, who's taking the loan, house loan, because the house market, the value is going to go up also, right? And, you know, if you go, so there are a lot of things, you know, definitely we can do probably another session, Brother Dickinson, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, it will. And I think that's very valid points, because the issue here that raises the whole question of whether this is truly nasi'a. Remember, nasi'a, the Arabic word that I'm using to describe, remember, this is a very simple, I'm just using this so we can all keep it in our mind for ourselves to answer these questions. Riba is known by basically, let's say, four things. When it comes to the exchange of items, okay, or let's say, what word should I use here? Like, any type of goods that we use to buy and sell. Then when it comes to that, there's three things only that are considered when it comes to whether something is riba or not. The value of an item based on its weight or volume, or of the type of item that it is. The jins is if it's the same thing, okay? Specifically, if it's the same item. Let's get that. So just memorize that, get that out of your mind. And well, no, don't get it out of your mind. Keep it in your mind, but let's go to the next. The fourth thing that is considered riba is something that's called nasiha in Arabic, which basically is specifically interest-bearing loans. And by that, again, when we say the practice of jahiliyyah, I give you $2,000 and say, I want 4,000 back in 2 months. Okay, you get it? Based on all of that, just looking at those basic examples of what it is in Sharia. Now, if we look at the issue of mortgage, it might become a little more complicated, right? Because it's not as simple as that. There's more complications involved. Part of it too is the fact that you said like that they're going to make a profit because it is a business transaction. Obviously, they have to make their profit somehow. Whether you're buying or renting, they're going to make that profit, even if they call it interest or not. Somehow they're going to make profit off of it. But you are also using that item. It is not just a matter of giving a loan and then paying back on interest. There's more to it than that. You're using it, right? And it is something that ultimately you may make a profit too. As you said, that the house, the value of the house may go up and so forth and so on. Allah knows best. So you make a profit too at certain times, in certain instances, and certain cases. So it's not that, I don't think, clear cut, so to speak.
So, Brother Dickinson,
Yeah.
one question I have. So my understanding is that business always have a risk for loss. So it's always you do for profit, but there is a risk for loss. And in case of interest, in case of the riba, we are saying that, okay, we will always be in profit. No matter what, if there is a loss, it will be a loss for the buyer, or it will be the loss of someone else. But I will always be in profit. So that is the whole concept in bank. Yeah, the bank, they always are profit. They will never ever have the loss unless, I don't know if there will be a very, 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 very unique situation where they may have some loss. I'm sure that they cover with the PMIs or similar things. So that is the main reason, that there is no risk for loss, and every loss buyer has to get that because of this.
So there is always a risk. There
right?
is always a risk, and you cover it through insurance, just like any other business.
You mean the bank covers it with insurance?
Yeah, with insurance.
Right.
And how
you
big?
have your either you have your PMI, or you have your homeowner your title insurance. If something happened to the property, bank covers that too. So you cover it through insurance, just like your health insurance or any other business insurance. You get fire on your property, whatever, you cover.
All right. Well, I'll leave it here, because now I'm going to go on and go back and research that specific question. That not based on only one, or let's say two things. That a mortgage is not completely interest-based loan, because there are other factors. That first of all, it's not a perishable good. That's the first point I understood. And second of all, that you're also taking some kind of benefit, and there is some type of what we call in Sharia ziyada. Meaning you're getting something out of it. Even monetarily, at times, you can also be gaining in terms of the value of the home at times. Okay, so let me look at those two issues.
Can you please add one more thing here? So all the scenarios which Ahmad just talked about, rent to buy or paying on the installments on the higher price. In my opinion, all these scenarios should only be between buyer and seller. When we involve the third party, the bank is not buyer, they are not seller.
That's true. Right.
Still, those scenarios are valid in this situation, in this triangular situation. So that is my question.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, no problem. Inshallah. Right. Inshallah. Inshallah. Yeah, let me just, I would still only feel comfortable if just we do, give me another week. Inshallah, next time we meet, we'll try and talk about those three things, inshallah, specifically, inshallah ta'ala.
Imam, I think some of this...
Find a way in the Sharia to kind of balance yourself. And especially when you're raising your children, you don't want to give your children any reason to think that because I'm Muslim, I'm missing out, or, you know what I mean? Like they just increase that already, the pressure that they already feel as Muslims, being different and being, singled out by so much negativity. You don't want to increase that. So I think also we have to be careful of, like, I agree, if you don't feel comfortable with something, don't do it, right? But also don't take it too far, that if you have a valid opinion within the Sharia that gives you the room to do something, then take it as much as you need, and, leave the rest up to Allah. Allah knows our situation. Allah Ta'ala knows the kind of circumstance and environment that we live in, and we always have to remind ourselves that He is Arhamur Rahimin. He's the most merciful of those who show mercy, and He will always give us some kind of dispensation or way where we can still be within the limits of the Sharia and living our lives bi'ithnillah. So inshallah.
So Imam, that hadith that the Prophet was sending, that unsettling feeling that you get, do you think he was? Do you think that the implication, I'm assuming, is that that's based on some degree of knowledge, or do you think he was more referring to just the innate feeling we get when we're doing something?
That's a very good question, and I would say that, in essence, we always say that Islam is a deen of fitra, correct?
Yes, yeah, at least some of the base.
Right. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't learn, or we have an obligation to learn. And if it was enough just to rely on our fitrah, then why would Allah even send prophets? You understand?
Mm-hmm.
If it's just intuitive, why should prophets be sent? However, there is still the idea that prophets are sent to remind us. That's part of what they do also. Innama anta mudhakkir. Okay? In one ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that the prophets, you are nothing other than a reminder. So I'm not trying to get too philosophical with this, but let me just put it this way. Can you be reminded of something that you don't know? You understand the question? Can you be reminded? How can I remind you of something that you don't know?
Right.
To remind you means you already know it. I just have to remind you that, look, you already know the answer. This is kind of an implication of what I'm getting at, is that there's many things in the deen when we say it's fitri, it's almost intuitive. There's something that Allah has given us all inside of us. Okay, and that's also why He mentioned the heart, because remember, many times we said the heart. What is the, according to Islamic viewpoint, the viewpoint of Islamic theology, where's the intellect?
Heart.
In the heart. So we've been given this tool by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is innate, and we can feel with it, if you will. We can determine with it at certain times what is right and what is wrong. You see?
Mm-hmm.
If the Prophet, certain things, no doubt, he explains. Like that's a part of the Prophet's duty, that is to explain things to us that we don't know, obviously. But there's also a part where he is mudhakkir, meaning that he is there just to remind us of what we can already determine, but we are forgetful of it. We are ghafil for whatever reasons, because of our nafs, our passions, our desires, our culture, our environment, all those things, right, contribute to the ghafla and the type of if you will, to be almost like unconscious of what we should already know, all right? So there are things, that's why the Prophet said that, look to your heart, because innately we should be able to answer those questions. See what I'm saying? Does that feel good to you? Do you have a kayfa tahkumun, right? When you think about it, can you really feel comfortable with that conclusion? You see what I'm saying?
Right.
So this is part of why the Prophet ﷺ taught the Sahaba in a very similar way. He was asked certain questions and he would respond with a question. What was he trying to do? He was trying to bring out that innate ability in all of us to be able to determine things, right? If it's right or wrong. You know what I mean? Trying to teach us also to become, if you will, capable of that. And that is to return us into that original state of dhikr, because that's what dhikr means. To be conscious of Allah doesn't just mean to repeat Allah's names and attributes. It also means to be conscious of Allah's commandments. You see what I'm saying? So how would you know that, right? Is that you would have to be able to be in a true state of dhikr, that innate ability you have, that you're now conscious of it and you follow it, rather than just kind of like what we do a lot as people, as individuals, is that we kind of ignore sometimes even what our heart tells us. Okay, you know what I mean?
Right.
That doesn't seem to be right. When I think about it, I don't feel comfortable with that conclusion. Yet we ignore it for whatever reasons, you know, and people are complex. They have many different reasons to do it. But, you know, and that's what the Prophet does too. He also reminds us. In other words, the mudhakkir, reminding, means that by implication, you already know it anyhow. You just need to be reminded of it. Anyhow, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, well, let me get to those three basic questions about mortgages in specific, inshallah, and we will try and answer it in more detail next time, inshallah. Any other questions? No? Okay, well, it's very good being with you today. Make dua for me and for everyone. May Allah Ta'ala keep us healthy and protect us.
Okay, thanks, Imam.
Alhamdulillah.
Thank you.
Alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum
Walaikum assalam. Thank you, brother.